That number 7 sounded hollow, and my father's tools were hidden beneath it.
He was 24 and homeless. No lease, no bed, no address, just a canvas tool roll and $9 he had, hidden beneath the insole of his work boot. And with that $9, he bought a forgotten brass key tag stamping shop outside Dayton in Montgomery County, Ohio. A place that had fallen off county maps. In 1987, the rear brick wall had bowed inward. One leg of the stamping bench had split. The county condemned it on October 14, 2023, with demolition planned for early spring. But inside the locked drawer beneath the stamping block, behind a numbered die untouched for 36 years, waited a hollow chamber holding the truth about his father. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Owen Blake had been aligning his whole life without knowing it. As a boy, he squared his school papers before writing and turned every jar label outward in the cupboard. His father never mocked him. Daniel Blake would slide a crooked object half an inch toward Owen and wait for the boy to finish the correction. Daniel repaired locks for churches, machine shops, and old apartment buildings along the Great Miami River. He came home smelling of brass dust and graphite, with his fingertips darkened around the nails. Each night he sharpened one pencil and entered every job in a cloth-bound ledger. On Saturdays, Daniel took 9-year-old Owen to a narrow workroom behind Garrison Lock and Safe on East 3rd Street. A foot-powered press stood beside trays of brass blanks and a V-jig polished bright by years of use. Daniel taught him to seat the blank against both shoulders, lower the numbered die until it kissed the metal, then lift it and check again. A tag could shift while the hand reached for the hammer. One careless strike made a crooked number permanent. Before lunch, Owen chose a blank from the scrap tray, filed its edge smooth, and stamped one digit. His first was a 7, deep on the left. Daniel rubbed his thumb across it and handed it back. Make it readable after the shine is gone. Owen later understood that his father meant more than brass. Honest work should remain useful after praise and polish had worn away. Daniel died at 48 after a winter heart attack behind St. Anne's. By the time Owen reached the garage, his sister Marla had hired a clean-out crew. The hammers, ledgers, jigs, and labeled cigar boxes vanished in one afternoon. Owen found only the canvas roll beneath a cabinet, holding a 6-inch file and one bent brass ring. Marla was 7 years older and controlled rooms without raising her voice. She stacked bills by date, answered questions with deadlines, and kept every document in a blue accordion folder no one else could touch. Owen, working nights at a packaging warehouse in Moraine, gave her his half of the rent because the lease was in her name. On May 3, 2024, he came home to find the white ceramic key bowl missing from the entry table. In its place lay a folded notice and his key, removed from the ring. The tenancy ended at midnight. Marla stood in her coat with the blue folder beneath one arm. Their mother sat at the table, both hands around a cup gone cold. Owen read the notice twice. The rent money he had transferred 3 days earlier was not mentioned. "You took the rent and left me here." Exactly 8 words. Marla looked toward the window. Their mother lowered her eyes and turned the cup until its handle aligned with the placemat. That careful motion told Owen there would be no argument for him. He packed one change of clothes, the tool roll, and Daniel's ledger pencil. Behind him, the deadbolt turned once, deliberate and final. For 6 weeks, he measured safety in hours. First, he slept behind the warehouse between bundled cardboard pallets, waking before the forklifts started. When a supervisor found his blanket, Owen took the number 17 bus downtown and spent 3 nights upright in the RTA station, his duffel looped through one arm. In Kettering, a church volunteer gave him socks and peanut butter crackers. He slept beneath a closed dental office, then behind a laundromat where dryer vents warmed the brick until 2. His money fell from $68 to $41, then $23. In Miamisburg, he unloaded tile for cash. 2 nights he rented a mission bunk. The third, every bed was taken. Rain drove him under an abandoned bank overhang. He used the tool roll as a pillow and woke with the file's outline pressed into his cheek. By the 6th week, he had $11.30. His paycheck had failed because payroll had no current address. He stopped buying coffee, washed in library restrooms, and learned which public buildings opened earliest. At the Dayton Metro Library, he sat near the local history shelves and read trade directories to remain awake. A classified notice hung crookedly beside tax sale announcements. County disposal. Abandoned commercial structure, 918 Harlan Avenue. Brass tag and key marker shop. Minimum administrative bid, $9. Buyer assumes liens, hazards, and demolition orders. Someone had circled stamping equipment remains in blue pencil. Owen copied the address onto a bus transfer. He had $9 in his boot, money Marla had never known about, and $2.30 in his pocket. The county office closed at 4:30. He returned to the directory, tightened the cord on his duffel, and walked toward the bus stop. By noon the next day, Owen was carrying everything he owned toward a shop the county had already decided should disappear. The westbound bus carried Owen as far as the transit stop near East 3rd Street, where the driver watched him shoulder the duffel and pointed toward a transfer he could not afford. Owen thanked him, unfolded the library map, and began walking. Harlan Avenue lay nearly 7 miles away by the route he chose, east through streets where old factory windows reflected a pale November sky. His right boot had separated slightly at the toe, so he shortened his stride whenever the pavement was wet. The canvas tool roll rested across his shoulder, its file tapping his spine with every other step. Near dusk, he passed the last bus shelter and followed Springfield Street beyond the blocks he recognized. Wind moved wrappers along the curb in dry circles. The temperature fell to 31 degrees, then 27 before midnight. He found a hay barn behind an unused feedlot, one wall open where sliding doors had come off their rail. The hay was old and gray at the edges, but it held the day's warmth beneath its surface. Owen burrowed between 2 square bales, kept his boots on, and slept with the deed notice folded inside his shirt. At dawn, frost silvered the weeds around the barn. He walked the remaining 4 miles while trucks passed close enough to lift the hem of his coat. The neighborhood appeared without a sign announcing it. There was Mercer's Hardware behind wire glass windows. Bellman's Café with 2 stools visible through steamed panes. Harlan's Shoe Repair under a striped awning. Nestor Plumbing Supply beside a fenced yard of pipe. And Grady Lock Service, its painted key faded nearly white. 3 blocks farther stood the Montgomery County Surplus Office, a low brick annex attached to an older courthouse building. Owen entered through a metal door that resisted the first pull. The lobby smelled of wet wool and floor wax. A woman behind the counter wore a silver thimble on the little finger of her left hand, though no sewing lay nearby. Her brass nameplate read, Evelyn Harrow, Deputy Clerk. She looked at Owen's duffel, then at the folded notice he placed before her. The stamping shop. Yes, ma'am. You brought the administrative bid. He slid 9 $1 bills across the counter. They were softened from being hidden in his boot, and one held the faint shape of his heel. Mrs. Harrow counted them without comment, aligned their edges against the blotter, and opened a gray file. You understand the rear wall has moved 3 inches. Yes, ma'am. You understand there is no electrical service. Yes, ma'am. You understand the city has marked the roof unsafe? Yes, ma'am. You understand demolition remains scheduled unless you file for a stay. Yes, ma'am. Her eyes remained on him a moment longer. Then she turned the file around. Sign where the flags are. There were 6 yellow tabs. Owen read each paragraph before signing, although the language blurred near the end. Assumption of hazard. Waiver of inspection. Unpaid water assessment. Structural liability. When he finished, Mrs. Harrow pressed the county seal into a red ink pad and brought the brass stamp down with both hands. The sound was smaller than Owen expected. She separated the deed copy, folded it once, and gave him a ring holding 2 keys. One was modern and silver. The other was short, dark with oxidation, and stamped 918. Go east on Springfield, she said. Turn right after the rail spur, then left at the boarded pharmacy. Harlan bends north, near the drainage channel. The shop is the last brick building before the walnut lot. Owen slipped the keys into his pocket. Mrs. Harrow had begun closing the file when she stopped. Her thimble clicked once against the counter. Blake? She said. He waited. Daniel Blake? My father. She removed her glasses and folded them carefully. Without them, her eyes seemed less official and more tired. He made the key tags for this building. Before the electronic system, she touched the drawer beneath her counter. Every office had a brass oval with the room number and a letter beneath it. Your father could center 4 characters without measuring twice. He measured twice, Owen said. Mrs. Harrow's mouth changed at one corner. Yes, I suppose he did. She opened the drawer and took out an old key on a split ring. Its tag had been polished thin from years of handling, but the number remained square and clear. B14. He also kept apprentices, she said. Young men mostly. A few women when the shops would take them. People came to him after factories closed, after the service, after trouble at home. He found them benches, tools, sometimes rooms. Owen looked down at the tag. Daniel had never spoken of that work. On Saturdays, there had only been the press, the brass, and the slow correction of Owen's hands. Was this his shop? No. Mrs. Harrow returned the key to the drawer, but Mr. Voss, the owner, knew him well. They exchanged work for nearly 20 years. When Voss closed the place, he refused to sell the equipment, said it had already been promised. To whom? Mrs. Harrow replaced her glasses. He never put the name in the county file. Outside, the cold had sharpened. Owen stood beneath the courthouse gutter and unfolded the deed to make certain the property address had not changed while he was inside. At the bottom, beneath the seal, his name appeared in narrow-typed letters. Owner, Owen and Daniel Blake. He followed Mrs. Harrow's directions past the rail spur, where rusted tracks disappeared beneath gravel. A man in a brown work apron was sweeping the sidewalk outside Mercer's Hardware. He paused when Owen passed, but offered only a nod. At the boarded pharmacy, a black and white dog emerged from beneath a porch, barked twice, and followed Owen at a distance, its left ear folded over at the tip. An elderly neighbor in a red cardigan opened her screen door. Winnie? She called. The dog stopped. The woman looked from Owen to the deed in his hand. You bought the Voss place. I did. She considered that, one hand resting on the doorframe. Roof leaks over the press. Thank you. Wasn't a warning, she said, and called the dog inside. Walnut trees began where the houses thinned. Their bare limbs crossed above the road, and the fallen husks beneath them had turned black in the grass. Harlan Avenue narrowed beside a drainage channel lined with limestone and winter weeds. The shop stood at the bend. It was a single-story structure of red common brick, approximately 28 feet wide and 50 feet deep. The front windows had been covered from inside with fiberboard. Tar paper showed through a long wound in the roof, and the stone chimney leaned slightly away from the building. Above the door, a painted wooden sign remained beneath rusted brackets. VO SS numbering and key tags. Most of the gold lettering had peeled away. The ampersand endured. Owen crossed the weed-grown apron and fitted the modern key into the front lock. It turned halfway, stopped, then yielded when he lifted the door by its handle. Cold air came outward, carrying the dry smell of paper, mouse nests, and old metal. The bottom of the door scraped over grit with a sound like a shovel crossing stone. The front room held a counter, 2 stools, and a wallboard pierced with hundreds of small hooks. Rectangular outlines showed where tags had once hung. On the floor lay 3 brass blanks greened at their edges. Owen picked one up. It tasted faintly metallic when he touched his thumb to his lip. Rain had entered near the front window and lifted the linoleum in stiff black curls. Beneath it, the floorboards remained hard. He moved toward the back, placing each foot carefully. A loose ceiling panel breathed downward when the wind pressed the roof. Somewhere inside the wall, a mouse scratched, paused, then scratched again. The workroom door stuck against a mound of fallen plaster. Owen pushed until the gap widened enough for his shoulder. The stamping bench stood beneath the rear window. One cast iron leg had split at the foot and been braced with a brick. The press leaned several degrees to the right. Dust covered the steel block, yet the handle still wore a dark polish where thousands of palms had gripped it. Along the wall, shallow wooden drawers bore penciled numbers from 0 through 9. Owen tried the silver key on the locked drawer beneath the stamping block. It did not fit. The older key entered, but the mechanism would not turn. He did not force it. By evening, the temperature inside matched the air outdoors. Owen swept a rectangle of floor beside the counter using a strip of cardboard. He ate the last 2 crackers from his coat pocket, filled an empty bottle at the spigot beside the neighbor's porch after she gave permission, and laid his tool roll beneath his head. Darkness settled differently inside a building that belonged to him. Every noise seemed to ask whether he intended to remain, the roof ticking as it cooled, the chimney giving one low knock, walnut branches brushing the rear bricks. Owen placed the deed beneath his shirt, closed both hands around the ring of keys, and watched moonlight gather on the face of the press. Make it readable after the shine is gone. At first light, Owen began with water. The iron pump behind the shop gave only a hollow cough until he removed the cap, poured in half his bottle, and worked the handle slowly. Rust-colored water came first, then a clear, cold stream that smelled faintly of limestone. He filled 2 buckets borrowed from the woman with the red cardigan, who introduced herself only as Mrs. Vale, and pointed toward the outhouse beyond the walnut trees. "Watch the 3rd board," she said. The 3rd board bowed but held. During the next 3 days, Owen learned the building by sound. The front floor squeaked near the counter, the hall clicked beneath the left wall, and one board outside the workroom gave a low complaint before settling. He marked each weak place with chalk. At night, he could tell whether the wind came from the west by the loose pane above the door. The roof leaked twice. He set a dented wastebasket beneath one drip, and a brass blank tray beneath the other. On the 4th morning, he walked back to Mercer's Hardware. The man in the brown apron stood behind a counter crowded with jars of screws. He had a white scar through his right eyebrow and turned each coin face up before placing it in the register. The store smelled of rope, kerosene, and the mineral sweetness of cut lumber. "You are the Blake boy," he said. "Owen, Silas Mercer." Owen laid this county deed on the counter, then a short list written on the back of a tax sale envelope. "I need enough to make the chimney safe." Silas read the list. "You have money? $2.30. That will buy the brush handle." Owen waited. Silas looked toward the front window, where cold sunlight showed every scratch in the glass. "Your father repaired the lock on my mother's house and would not send a bill. That was his choice." It was. Silas folded the list once. "Mine is to open an account. I do not have an address. You own one." Silas took a ruled ledger from beneath the counter and wrote, "Owen Blake, 918 Harlan," in narrow capitals. He set down a used chimney brush, 3 sections of fiberglass rod, a dust mask, and a thin book whose cover read, "Repairs for the Owner Builder." "The book is free," he said. "It came with a furnace in 1979. Owen studied the penciled prices. The used 6-inch brush, $375, 3 rod sections, $420, furnace cement, $265, a galvanized stovepipe elbow, $310, cotton work gloves. Blur 35, Silas added a box of wooden matches without writing it down. When you can. I will. I know." Back at the shop, Owen read the chimney chapter twice, then climbed onto the roof through the rear window, using a ladder Mrs. Vale kept beneath her porch. He tied a rope around his waist and looped it through the chimney bracket, though the bracket itself moved when tested. The flue was nearly closed. He removed a compacted bird's nest with a hooked length of wire, then lowered the brush in 6-inch strokes. The rods flexed against the tile. Black flakes came down first, followed by brittle sheets of glazed creosote that struck the firebox like broken plates. Every 20 minutes, he climbed down to clear the opening. He sealed the workroom doorway with an old curtain, wrapped cloth around his nose beneath the mask, and shoveled soot into a feed sack. By afternoon, his eyelashes were gray, and his shoulders trembled each time he raised the brush. The worst deposit clung at the smoke shelf. Owen lay on his back, reached through the firebox with a narrow scraper, and worked by touch. Creosote packed beneath his nails. Once, the scraper slipped and cut the heel of his hand. He rinsed it at the pump, wrapped it in a strip torn from his undershirt, and returned. 9 hours after he began, daylight showed through the flue. The following morning, he patched 2 cracks in the firebox with furnace cement, replaced the crushed elbow, and waited until evening for the repair to skin over. He built the test fire from walnut twigs and 3 pieces of broken pallet wood. Smoke hesitated beneath the throat. Owen opened the front door 2 inches. The draft strengthened, drawing the smoke upward in a narrow blue column. He added 1 piece of oak Mrs. Vale had left beside the steps. The chimney pulled clean. Heat moved into the room slowly, warming the iron first, then the bricks, then Owen's hands. He set a tin cup of water near the coals and opened a can of beans with the awl from his tool roll. When the beans began to bubble, their tomato smell displaced the soot and mouse dust. He ate from the can with a wooden paint stirrer. It was the first hot meal he had cooked since May. The next day, Owen turned to the workroom. He carried every loose object into the front room and wiped the benches with damp rags. He found a hand shear with 1 blade chipped, a box of oval brass blanks wrapped in oil paper, 2 V-shaped alignment jigs, a rawhide mallet darkened at the face, a foot press fitted with a worn cutting punch, 7 steel number dies in separate slots, and a ledger stand with its brass page clips still working. The 8th drawer, marked 7, was empty. Above the stamping bench hung a board showing sample tags: boiler room, master, east stair, locker 12, fire door. Each had been struck with steady depth. Owen ran his thumb across the letters. None had sharp ridges on the back. Whoever made them had supported the brass properly and used only enough force. The locked drawer remained beneath the steel stamping block. Owen brushed dust from its face and examined the keyhole with the library light from his borrowed flashlight. The old key entered fully, but stopped before the pins lifted. Graphite might have helped, yet he had none. He scraped a little from Daniel's ledger pencil, crushed it between 2 coins, and blew the powder into the lock through a rolled paper tube. The key turned 1/8 of a circle, then it stopped. Owen did not increase the pressure. He removed the drawer above it and reached into the cavity. His fingertips met the rear of the lock housing, and a steel linkage bent slightly out of line. Using the awl, he lifted the linkage while turning the key with his other hand. The bolt withdrew. Inside lay 3 steel dies, 7, 8, and 9. The 7 had been placed sideways, separate from the others. Owen lifted it. The die felt wrong. A solid number stamp of that size should have balanced low and heavy in the palm. This one carried its weight near the engraved end. He tapped its base against the steel block. The sound was duller than the 8. He compared them one at a time. The 8 rang. The 9 rang. The 7 answered like wood beneath a metal. Near its base, an almost invisible seam circled the shaft. Owen wiped it with oil and found 2 pinholes opposite each other. He inserted the tips of a pair of dividers and turned. Nothing moved. He warmed the die beside the stove for 10 minutes. Old grease softened along the seam. This time, the base rotated half a turn and came free. A cedar disc had been pressed into the hollow shaft. Its surface carried the faint smell of a pencil box Daniel once kept in the garage. Owen used the awl to raise it by one edge. Beneath the disc, tightly rolled paper filled the cavity. The first roll was not paper, but a strip of oiled cloth tied with waxed thread. Owen set it on the cleaned bench. Behind it lay a small brass key, 2 inches long, its bow shaped like a 7. He examined the drawer again. The steel bottom sat higher at the rear than at the front. Owen knocked once with his knuckle. The front gave a dense answer. The rear sounded hollow. He removed the drawers on either side, reached beneath the cabinet, and found 4 machine screws hidden under hardened grease. 3 loosened. The 4th had rusted into place. Owen soaked it with kerosene from a jar Silas had provided, waited an hour, then pressed the screwdriver downward with both hands. The slot began to tear. He stopped, filed the screwdriver tip square, and tried again. The screw turned. The false bottom lifted less than an inch before catching on a folded packet. Owen slid his fingers beneath the steel plate and raised it evenly. Packages occupied the space from wall to wall. He removed them in order and placed each on the bench. A canvas bundle held Daniel's small chasing hammer, his mill file, and a machinist's square, engraved DB. The tools had been wrapped against moisture, their steel surfaces filmed with oil. A second package contained raw brass sheet cut into strips, several dozen blanks, and 3 unopened coils of split key rings. Beneath those lay a black tin box with a hinged lid and a clasp tied shut by cotton cord. Owen sat before opening it. The cord broke at the first pull. Inside were 6 envelopes of United States savings bonds, each registered decades earlier, and a cloth bank bag filled with numbered brass tags. A ledger rested beneath them, its pages divided into names, tag numbers, trades, and locker locations. The first line read, Caleb Kemp, tag 014, tool chest, north wall, electrical. The next named a welder, then a locksmith, a machinist, a press operator, and a woman listed as apprentice engraver. Besides several names, Daniel had written placed, employed, or room found. At the bottom of the tin lay currency, bound in faded paper straps. Owen counted it once, stacking the bills by denomination. Then he counted again. The bonds had a maturity value of $48,000. The currency totaled $14,612. A paper envelope held $388 in coins. Morgan silver dollars. Walking Liberty half dollars. mercury dimes, and Indian head cents, separated by tissue. Together, the cash amounted to $63,000. The final object was a bronze military medal on a frayed ribbon. Its reverse bore a name Owen did not recognize, and the year 1952. He remained at the bench until the fire collapsed into red seams beneath white ash. Outside, darkness had gathered around the walnut trees. Owen closed the tin, returned the tools to their cloth, and left one sealed envelope untouched. A line in Daniel's handwriting crossed its face. For the person who opens the 7, Owen carried it to the front room, but did not break the seal. He put on his coat and stepped through the rear door. The drainage channel had filled after 2 days of rain, and black water moved beneath a skin of reflected moonlight. On the opposite bank, dry reeds bowed together whenever the wind passed. Owen stood there until his hands went numb. Behind him, the chimney breathed a thin ribbon of smoke into the cold, and beneath the shop roof waited $63,000, his father's tools, and a letter whose first sentence he was not yet ready to know. Make it readable after the shine is gone. Morning entered through the uncovered front window in a colorless band. Owen fed 2 walnut splits into the stove, heated water, and set the sealed envelope beside Daniel's machinist's square. The handwriting leaned slightly forward, each capital formed with the same open lower loop Owen had watched move across ledgers on Saturday afternoons. He cut the envelope along its upper edge with the clean end of the file. Inside lay 4 pages, folded into thirds. My dear one, whoever you are, if you have opened the number 7, then the shop has chosen a patient hand. A hurried person would have broken the drawer, bent the linkage, or struck the die against the block until the plug came loose. You did none of those things, or this letter would be buried beneath splinters and filings. My name is Elias Voss. Dr. Miriam Feld at Miami Valley Hospital told me in Dayton that the weakness in my hands was amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. That was in February of 1987. She gave me the truth plainly, which is the kindest way to give hard news. By April, I could no longer guide a blank beneath the press without watching my fingers shake. This trade came through 4 generations. Johann Voss began cutting numbered stable tags in Cincinnati in 1871. His daughter Clara brought the dies north to Dayton in 1903 and stamped tool checks for the railway shops. Her son Walter returned from France in 1919 and opened this room on Harlan Avenue. I, Elias Walter Voss, inherited the bench in 1948 and closed the trade on October 2nd, 1987. My brother Samuel did not return from Korea. His last letter came from near the Chosin Reservoir, and the Army sent his effects the following spring. The medal in the box was his. I kept it because grief sometimes needs a weight the hand can hold. Your work instructions are simple. Anneal hard brass at approximately 900 degrees Fahrenheit, only until it shows a low red in dim light, then let it cool in still air. For cleaning, use 1 part salt to 2 parts flour with enough white vinegar to make a paste and rinse within 3 minutes. Seat each blank against both faces of the V-jig. Bring the die down without striking, correct the alignment, then use 1 deliberate blow. Polish the edge at 45 degrees, 6 strokes per side, so no burr cuts the key ring or the hand that carries it. Do not chase depth, chase evenness. Daniel Blake understood that. For more than 30 years, this room has been silent. Daniel and I filled the hidden ledger with the names of young workers who needed more than advice. Some needed a tool chest, some needed a room. Some needed one person to say that careful hands still had value after a factory had dismissed them. The bonds and money were saved from the sale of our work, from Daniel's repairs, and from small repayments made by people who once stood at this bench with empty pockets. It was never meant for comfort alone. Inheritance is not what rests in a box. It is what returns to use. Repair the roof if you can. Keep the press if it can be made true. Find the people listed in the ledger, or their children, and ask only whether the tools serve them well. You owe no ceremony to the dead. Give the living a bench, a light, and enough time to learn without shame. Behind the shop, near the drainage channel, stands the oldest walnut. Daniel fixed a brass marker beneath its north limb in 1981. Do not pry it loose. Its purpose will become plain when the proper key reaches you. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Elias Walter, Foss, October 2nd, 1987. Owen read the letter twice. The second time, he stopped where Elias had written Daniel's name and placed one soot-darkened finger beneath it. When he finished, he folded the pages along their original creases, returned them to the envelope, and pressed the paper flat beneath the machinist's square. He carried the small brass key from the hollow die through the back door. Morning frost covered the channel bank. The oldest walnut stood several yards beyond the outhouse, its trunk divided low into two heavy columns. Owen circled it until he found a rectangular plate beneath the north limb, nearly hidden by bark that had grown around its edges. The plate bore a stamped 7. Its keyhole had been filled with wax. Owen warmed the wax between his fingers and lifted it out with the awl. The little key entered, but when he tried to turn it, the mechanism held fast. He remembered the letter. Do not pry it loose. He withdrew the key, wiped it clean, and left the plate untouched. Back inside, he opened the canvas bundle and took out Daniel's chasing hammer. He cleaned the handle with a rag, then held the steel head near the stove until the old protective oil thinned and released a smell of linseed and metal. For a moment, the polished face caught the flame. Owen set it beside the press, not as a relic, but within reach. That afternoon, he walked to Mercer's Hardware, carrying the ledger beneath his coat. Silas read the first 3 names and removed his spectacles. Caleb Kemp is alive, he said. Lives near Riverside. Mrs. Vale lent Owen an envelope and 2 stamps from a roll kept in her kitchen drawer. At Bellman's Café, Doris Bellman gave him soup without asking for money and wrote the telephone number of a retired press operator on a paper napkin. Mrs. Harrow searched an old county directory and found an address for the daughter of the apprentice engraver. None of them called these gestures charity. Silas sharpened a pencil. Mrs. Vale closed the stamp drawer. Doris pushed the bowl nearer while pretending to wipe the counter. There are kindnesses that arrive so quietly we understand them only years later. A meal placed within reach. A name remembered. A door held open when dignity has become heavier than hunger. What small kindness did someone once give you when you had no proper way to repay it? That night, Owen wrapped Daniel's hammer, square, and file in clean cloth and placed them beside his bedroll. Elias's letter rested beneath the deed against his chest. The fire settled. Beyond the wall, water moved through the drainage channel, and the old press stood level enough to hold moonlight on its steel block. The first snow came on December 2nd and left 4 inches across Harlan Avenue, enough to hide the broken shingles, but not the dark stains spreading above the press. Owen read the roofing chapter 3 times beside the stove. Then he measured the building from the ground and checked the figures from the ladder. 2 roof planes, each 28 by 26 feet, requiring 16 squares of asphalt shingles after waste, 6 rolls of felt, and nearly 40 pounds of galvanized roofing nails. Silas Mercer delivered the materials on credit and placed an old roofing hatchet on top of the bundles. Its head was narrow, with a gauge notch near the blade. My brother carried that 30 years, he said. He won't be needing it. A former roofer named Leonard Price arrived the next morning wearing a canvas coat repaired at both elbows. He was 71, walked with one stiff knee, and refused the envelope Owen had prepared from his tile unloading money. Keep it for flashing. They began by removing the soft decking around the leak. Leonard showed Owen how to sister a sound rafter beside one split by fastening a full-length board against it, drawing the two together with clamps before driving structural screws. They stretched a chalk line across each course and snapped it once, leaving a blue mark bright against the felt. Owen learned Leonard's three-stroke method. Set the nail, drive it nearly flush, then finish with one controlled tap. On the fourth day, Leonard touched a shingle with the hatchet handle. "That nail's proud." Owen reached for the hammer. "Pull it." They worked 11 days. Snow melted into their cuffs during the mornings and froze again along the ladder rungs after sunset. Owen carried shingles in half bundles, so the weakened decking would not bear too much weight at once. Leonard cut the valleys. Owen laid the straight runs, checking every fifth course against the eave. By December 14th, the final ridge cap lay beneath a cold, white sky. Leonard stood on the ground and watched water poured from a bucket run cleanly toward the gutter. The stain above the press did not darken again. January exposed damage the fire had hidden. 3 bricks near the chimney crown had spalled until their faces came away in thin shells. Mortar between the upper courses had become powder. Owen could remove it with the handle of a spoon. Silas sent him to a masonry yard for hydraulic lime and fire clay. Leonard's cousin, who had rebuilt kiln flues, wrote the mixture on the back of a receipt. 3 parts sharp sand, 1 part hydraulic lime, 1/4 part fire clay near the smoke chamber. Add water slowly. The mortar should hold a thumbprint without shining. For 3 weeks, Owen worked in temperatures that stayed in the 20s. He raked each joint to sound material, dampened the brick with a hand sprayer, then packed mortar with a narrow pointing trowel. Bare hands gave him better control, but his fingers went numb every 15 minutes. He warmed them beside the stove until sensation returned as pins beneath the skin. At the roofline, he replaced the broken bricks one at a time so the crown would not shift. He formed a slight slope away from the flue and covered the fresh work with damp burlap at night. The test fire came on January 27th. Owen burned newspaper first, then kindling, then a single oak split. He watched from outside while pale smoke rose vertically from the chimney before bending east in the wind. Inside, no soot appeared at the joints. No smoke entered the room. The draft drew clean. He stood with one hand against the warm brick and listened to the fire settle into its proper path. Beneath the lifted linoleum, the front room held white pine planks fastened with hand-cut rose-head nails. Their heads were black and irregular, each one driven before machines made nails identical. Owen rented a random orbit sander from Mercer's for $14 a day. Silas gave him only one warning: do not linger near the edges. The first pass used 80 grit discs and removed the gray surface along with decades of wax and shoe marks. Owen moved with the grain, overlapping each path by a third. The machine pulled hard toward the wall whenever the cord crossed behind him. At one loose plank, a rose-head nail stood high enough to tear the paper. Owen stopped, set it below the surface with Daniel's hammer, and filled the shallow scar with pine dust mixed into glue. The second pass, at 120 grit, erased the coarse scratches. The third, at 220, left the boards pale and smooth without making them slick. He vacuumed twice, wiped the floor with mineral spirits, and waited until no dust rose beneath his palm. 3 oil coats followed. Each went on thinly with a folded cloth, rested 20 minutes, then was wiped dry. Owen allowed 48 hours for the final cure. The pine changed from dull brown to dark honey, and in the oldest boards, the grain deepened toward mahogany. One morning, he carried the sander to the doorway and could not make himself plug it in. A great blue heron stood in the drainage marsh, its long neck folded against the cold. It waited without shifting while shallow water moved around its legs. Owen sat on the back step and watched until the bird opened its wings and crossed above the walnut trees. He did no work that day. The next morning, he finished the last corner beneath the counter. There were 8 windows in the shop. 3 had no glass at all. 4 held cracked panes patched with tape or cardboard. The 8th contained one original sheet, wavy and faintly green, marked in the lower corner with the date 1788. It had likely been salvaged from an earlier building and fitted into the shop when Walter Voss opened it. Owen preserved it. He removed each sash, labeled the cords, and scraped away loose putty with a warmed knife. Silas supplied replacement glass and a tub of DAP 33. Owen rolled the glazing compound between his palms until it softened, pressed a continuous bed into the rabbet, set the pane gently, and secured it with glazier's points before laying the outer bevel. The line looked uneven on his first attempt. Silas examined it, thumb resting against the frame, tool from the corner outward. Owen scraped it clean and began again. For the sash weights, he used 1/4-inch cotton cord. He fed it over the pulley with a length of wire, tied a figure-8 knot at the counterweight, and drew each weight into its pocket before fixing the cord to the sash channel. The old glass from 1788 remained in the east window. Owen cleaned it only with warm water and a soft rag. Morning light passed through its ripples and bent across the floor in narrow, uneven bands. He installed the last sash on February 28th. As he tied off the second cord, a chickadee landed on a walnut branch outside, close enough for him to see the black cap above its eyes. The bird struck the branch once with its beak, watched him set the knot, and flew toward the marsh. Owen lowered the window. It met the sill without a gap. The walls near the chimney were built of horsehair plaster pressed over hand-split oak lath. Where water had entered, whole sections had loosened, though the brown hair still crossed the broken edges like thread in old cloth. Owen's first patch fell before it dried. The second cracked from corner to corner. The third held through the night, then separated when the chimney warmed. Silas brought a paper bag from his shed. Inside was horsehair, left from his father's upholstery work, clean, but twisted into compact ropes. "Cut it short," he said. "Long hair clumps." Owen mixed lime plaster in small batches and folded in the clipped fibers. He dampened the lath, pressed on a scored scratch coat, and dragged a notched scrap of wood across the surface. The brown coat followed at 3/8 of an inch and cured beneath damp cloth for 72 hours. Last came a finish coat, no thicker than 1/8 inch, worked with a steel trowel until the wall met the old plaster without a ridge. The repairs remained visible in certain light. Owen did not sand them away. These patches will hold another 100 years. Doris Bellman began leaving paper bags on the front step before sunrise. Each held something that could be warmed on the stove. 2 biscuits wrapped in waxed paper, potato soup in a jar, a heel of bread with butter pressed into its cut face. Doris wore red reading glasses on a chain and always pushed them into her hair when Owen attempted to pay. "In candles when the shop reopens," she said. Owen had never mentioned candles, but he wrote her name on a sheet inside Daniel's ledger and entered every meal beside it. A teenage boy arrived one Saturday on a blue Schwinn bicycle. He had a scattering of copper-colored freckles across his nose and carried a splitting maul balanced over one shoulder. Without introducing himself, he began dividing the rounds stacked near the rear wall. Owen followed him outside. "I cannot pay you." The boy reset a crooked piece of walnut on the block. "My mother said, 'About your grandfather. Daniel was my father.'" The boy nodded, as though correcting that detail inside his head. "Caleb Kemp, Harold Kemp's grandson." Caleb worked until the light failed, leaving a neat rank of split wood beneath the eave. When Owen offered him soup, he accepted one bowl and ate standing beside the stove, studying the press without touching it. Reverend Boyd passed the shop every morning at 7:15. He was a narrow man with polished shoes and one white eyebrow that rose higher than the other. He never entered unless invited. He tipped his felt hat toward the chimney and offered the same four-word prayer: "Keep these hands steady." Then he continued toward the brick church beyond the rail spur. By March, Owen had begun lifting his own hand when the Reverend passed. Owen postponed the cellar until February 11th. The door beneath the rear stairs had swollen in its frame and required half an hour of careful planing before it opened. 7 granite steps descended into cold air smelling of stone and iron. At the bottom lay a 12 by 15-foot fieldstone floor, dry except for a dark crescent near the east wall. He carried down a lantern and swept the stones one row at a time. At the center, beneath 2 inches of dust, he uncovered a dressed granite slab, fitted more precisely than the surrounding floor. A craft mark had been carved into its face, a circle divided by a vertical line, the old symbol Walter Voss had used on master key tags. Owen tested the edges with his fingertips. He did not lift it. While cleaning the steps, he found a small oak box wedged behind the third riser. Its lid had swollen, but opened beneath the slow pressure of a putty knife. Inside lay a brass key, whose bow carried the same circle and line symbol. Beneath it rested a tintype wrapped in linen. The photograph showed a young woman standing outside a cottage that had occupied the site before the brick shop. She held a stamping hammer upright against her apron. Her hair was pinned severely, but the level gaze, narrow jaw, and slight unevenness of the eyebrows belonged unmistakably to Owen's own face. He turned the plate over. Clara Voss, daughter of Johann, age 25, summer of 1903. Owen carried the key upstairs and placed it on the mantel beside the smaller key shaped like a 7. He tried it in the stamping drawer, the front door, the cellar door, and the brass plate in the walnut tree. It fit none of them. The key remained on the mantel. He did not know what it opened. Snow withdrew from the walnut roots in ragged circles. The drainage creek grew loud with meltwater, and green catkins appeared along branches that had looked dead all winter. Owen cleaned and oiled the press, but did not begin full production. The flywheel needed truing. 3 dies were mushroomed at their heads, and his hands remembered only the childhood outline of the work. He chose 1 Morgan dollar from the coin envelope and exchanged it through a dealer for brass sheet, abrasive cloth, and 2 replacement punches. The remaining money stayed inside the tin box. Each afternoon he practiced on small samples. He aligned 1 digit, struck it, measured the depth, and filed the edge. Crooked pieces went into a jar rather than the trash. They were records of what his hands had not yet learned. The house was patient. So was he. 2 winters later, in December 2024, Owen finished the first tag he was willing to let leave the shop. It was an oval of cartridge brass, 1 1/2 inches wide, made for the boiler room key at Reverend Boyd's church. Owen annealed the blank, cleaned it, and seated it against the restored V-jig. The number die descended until its face touched the metal. He checked the alignment twice. 1 deliberate stroke drove B6 into the brass at even depth. Owen beveled the edges with 6 passes on each side, polished only enough to remove the file marks, and fitted a split ring through the punched hole. Reverend Boyd rubbed his thumb over the characters. "I can read that." Owen placed the tag in his palm. "That is the purpose." The shop no longer smelled of wet plaster. White pine floors reflected the windows, and the repaired walls held shelves built from salvaged oak. The stamping bench stood level on a new foot cast by Caleb Kemp's former foundry partner. Above it hung Daniel's square, file, and chasing hammer, each within working reach. Owen kept the old Voss sign over the front door. One January afternoon, Caleb noticed that the unknown brass key from the cellar had a narrow groove along its shaft. It was not cut for a door lock. It resembled a service key used to release covered machinery plates. They carried it to the oldest walnut. The plate marked with the 7 still resisted the smaller key, but several inches above it, hidden beneath a ridge of bark, Caleb found a round brass insert bearing the circle and line craft symbol. The cellar key entered. Owen turned it 1/4 circle. A section of the plate released, not outward, but downward, revealing a copper-lined compartment set deep inside an old hollow that the tree had grown around. Within it lay a folded 48-star American flag, protected by waxed canvas. Beneath the flag was a note dated November 16, 1918, 5 days after the armistice ended the First World War. The writing belonged to Clara Voss. She had addressed it to her son Walter, still serving in France. She wrote that the shop would be his if he returned and hers if he did not, because work could not be buried merely because a family was grieving. She had hidden the flag after news came that 2 neighboring sons would not return. It was not to be displayed until every man from their street had been accounted for. Walter came home the following spring. The flag remained hidden for more than a century. Owen unfolded it only once, across the cleaned stamping bench. The fabric had browned at the creases, but all 48 stars remained intact. He and Caleb refolded it along the existing lines and placed it in an archival box supplied by Mrs. Harrow. The note stayed with it. The bronze medal from 1952 belonged to Samuel Voss, whose military record Silas helped obtain. On July 27th, the anniversary of the Korean Armistice Agreement, Owen carried the medal to Dayton National Cemetery. Samuel had no grave there, but his name was entered in a memorial register, maintained for service members whose remains had not come home. Owen placed no speech beside the register. He laid down a brass tag stamped SV 1952, stood for 1 minute, and left the medal with the family record office under proper receipt. Of the cash, Owen used 4 coins. 1 purchased the first brass sheet. A second paid the filing fee that halted demolition. A third bought Caleb a properly balanced stamping hammer after the boy completed 100 practice tags. The fourth was exchanged to repair the press bearings. The currency and bonds remained intact except for the taxes required when their ownership was settled. Owen placed them in a bank box with Elias's letter, Daniel's ledger, and written instructions naming the fund for whoever inherited the work after him. On the outside of the envelope, he wrote 2 words, "The next one." The shop reopened without a newspaper notice. Doris pinned an index card to the corkboard inside Bellman's Café. Brass key, tagshand, stamped repairs, and small orders 918, Harlan Avenue. The first customer brought 3 keys from a boarding house. The second mailed a worn tag from an elevator room in Springfield. Within 6 months, more than 40 names appeared on a mailing list kept in the front drawer: churches, mechanics, caretakers, locksmiths, and owners of buildings too old for replacement parts. Owen accepted only work he could complete carefully. On Wednesday evenings, the front bench belonged to apprentices. Some came through the church. Others were sent by Silas or Doris. One had left school. Another had been laid off from an assembly plant. Owen did not ask them to explain their entire lives before touching a tool. He showed them the V-jig. "Seat both edges," he said, "then check again." Caleb returned in the spring, carrying the wooden sign beneath one arm. He was taller by then, his bicycle replaced by an aging pickup, whose passenger door opened only from inside. The sign had been carved from walnut taken from a fallen limb behind the shop. Its letters matched those on the old Voss board, though the cuts remained slightly uneven where Caleb's gouge had followed the grain. He held it beneath the original name. Voss's numbering and key tags and daughter Owen read the final line twice. "You know I have no daughters." Caleb brushed sawdust from one sleeve. Neither did Walter, when Clara started. Owen looked through the front window. At the apprentice bench, 2 young women from the vocational school were sorting blanks by gauge. One held each piece to the light before placing it in its tray. "Your spacing is narrow," Owen said. Caleb lifted the sign against the bricks. There was a knot. They mounted it anyway. That autumn, Owen began a letter on 4 sheets of plain paper. He used Daniel's ledger pencil until the point softened, sharpened it with a knife, and continued. "My dear one, whoever you are." He wrote about the bowed wall, the damaged roof, and the number 7. He recorded the press adjustments, the location of replacement bearings, and the correct mixture for cleaning brass. He explained where the money had come from and why none of it belonged entirely to the person who found it. Then he added the names of those who had carried the shop through its second beginning: Silas, Doris, Mrs. Vale, Reverend Boyd, Harold Kemp, Caleb, Evelyn Harrow, and Leonard Price. Beside each name, Owen wrote the kindness as plainly as an invoice: credit extended, food left, address found, wood split, prayer offered, roof made sound. He did not seal the letter. There were still pages to fill. On cold evenings, light remained in the front windows after the other businesses closed. The press descended in a slow, measured rhythm while the creek moved beyond the walnut trees. A learner struck too hard, examined the mark, and reached for another blank. Owen never removed the flawed piece from the jar. Make it readable after the shine is gone. Years earlier, those words had meant that a number should survive wear. Now they lived in the open door, the second stool beside the press, and the tools returned to hands that had nearly forgotten their own worth. Before closing each night, Owen swept the brass filings into a separate tin. He covered the press, banked the stove, and placed the unfinished letter beneath Daniel's square. Outside, the sign moved slightly in the wind. The brass key tag stamping shop waits. It has always waited. At the county surplus office, Mrs. Harrow retired the following year. While emptying her desk, she found one of Owen's $9 bills caught behind the drawer, flattened by years of opening and closing. The paper still carried the faint outline of a heel. She placed it inside an envelope marked 918 Harlan Avenue and left it for the next clerk, along with a note explaining that some properties were worth more after the county had given up on them. The dollar remained in the drawer,